if I was alive back in 1930s or 1920s, whenever, and I just happened to see Hitler on the street and I had a dog, he would be one of those people that came up and pet your dog and liked your dog. Every man has his excuses, and the more vile the man becomes, the more touching the story has to be. What is my story now, I wonder? This is a quote from a book called The Blade Itself. It's a fantasy book. It's quite dark. It's quite grim. But this gentleman who said this is pointing to a very interesting idea about human nature. And it's that we all have this story that we tell ourselves. We all have this story that we tell ourselves. There's this line in A Game of Thrones where Jaime Lannister, for those who don't know, he was a vile person, a terrible person. He did some awful things. But then throughout the series, he became a better person. I hesitate to say good. I mean, I think he was good, but he was a better person. He grew as a person. His character developed. But near the end, he meets someone who has already had this opinion of him that he's this terrible person. And he asks Jaime, this vile person in his head at least, that, like, how do you sleep at night? Like, we all have to tell ourselves something. We all have to believe that we are good in order for us to fall asleep at night. So, like, how do you do it? Like, how do you sleep? How do you, this terrible, vile person, how do you convince yourself that you're a good person at night? And of course, it's a mockery. He's mocking him there. But it points to the same idea in this quote. The more vile the man becomes, the more touching the story has to be. Because every single person, for you to be able to go to sleep at night, you have to believe that you're a good person. You have to believe that you're doing the best with what you've been given. And where you don't have that, if you're such a person who doesn't have that, you do find yourself tossing and turning often and just struggling with your inadequacies, of your evilness. And that happens too. You see in a lot of examples in real world, but there's some movies and series that depict this really well too, such as Breaking Bad, where you have this really nice gentleman who all of a sudden breaks bad and becomes a murderer, and he produces drugs and sells drugs on the street. And there's that moral dilemma throughout the initial part of it where, yeah, he's having trouble sleeping at night. He's having trouble living with himself, with the evil he's becoming. But then eventually he just kind of becomes that. And eventually you're just this vile person, this terrible person who's doing all these terrible things, convincing yourself that you are doing it for good reasons. And so this is a very common thing where you go through that period a lot of times when people do terrible things or they find themselves in situations where they do something they're not proud of. They go through a little period of feeling terrible about it. But then we have this natural tendency to average out so that we can sleep at night, because we all like to sleep at night. So every man, every person has their excuses. And the more vile, the more touching the story has to be. Meaning, if you look at someone even perhaps more evil, if you look at Hitler, if you look at the Nazis, if you look at these people that have done terrible things, they never thought that they were evil. They thought they were doing the world a service. They thought they were getting rid of a race of people that didn't belong, that didn't really need to live, that they didn't have any value. They didn't think they were doing evil. They weren't evil in their own heads. And hence they had their drinks and they had supper with their families like everybody else, and they put their head down and they went to sleep at night. The character that plays one of the Nazi guys in Inglourious Bastards. It's a fantastic movie if you haven't seen it. Definitely go and watch it. But it's this character, and he plays a Nazi. This actor plays a Nazi, and he's clearly evil. Like he's chasing Jews down, and he's shooting them, and he's doing all these horrendous things. But in an interview, this actor was asked, how did you play that character so well? How did you play evil so well? And the actor is just confused. He's like, what do you mean? He said, well, you played this evil Nazi character, this terrible person doing these terrible things, and you were so good at it. You were so convincing. Like, how did you do that as an actor? And he said, the character wasn't evil. And that's the truth. Evil people don't think they're evil. It's really strange. It's a strange place to put yourself in psychologically, because you think, well, I sleep well at night, and I think I'm a good person, and I think I do the best with what I've been given. But so does everybody else. So does everybody else. And so how do you really know? How do you really know if you're a good person or not? Man, what a challenging question. But to get back to that original point of the more vile the man becomes, the more touching the story has to be. Yeah. The Nazis, Hitler, they had their excuses. And they were pretty damn touching ones. They were pretty convincing. All you have to do is read Mein Kampf and you'll know how, quote, quote, touching the story has to be. Whether we like it or not, the people, evil people in our heads, Hitler, Stalin, there's lots. You could even say maybe Genghis Khan. You know, there's people in history that have done terrible things. Whether you want to admit it or not, those people share the same rational faculty that you and I have. They have the same spectrum of emotions for the most part, unless they're psychopaths. And then, you know, are they truly evil if they're a psychopath? That's a different question, right? But they have the spectrum of emotions. They have a rational functioning brain. They have relationships. They have family. They have some hobbies. You know, it's often said that Hitler loved dogs. Hey there. Let me thank you for being a listener to this ad-free podcast. If you enjoy the podcast, there are a few things you can do to help me out. A 5-star review on Spotify or wherever you're listening to this really does help, and it's free. You can also sign up for my Substack newsletter or Patreon. Substack free gets each episode emailed to you along with the transcript in the form of an article. You'll also get access to my live talks, followed by a Q&A afterward. Substack Premium supporters and my patrons on Patreon get access to the recordings and a brief article of those Q&A sessions, access to full episodes of the Paradoxically Speaking podcast, my Steps to Success interview series, Stoic meditations, and much more. Links to Substack and Patreon can be found in the show notes. Now imagine you walking down the street and then you meet someone that has a dog and you have a dog, and then you bond over your animals and it's like, oh yeah, I love dogs. And then you get this little camaraderie about these dogs, and then you think, well, if I was born in, if I was alive back in 1930s or 1920s, whenever, and I just happened to see Hitler on the street and I had a dog, he would be one of those people that came up and pet your dog and liked your dog. Like, that's a crazy thought, to think that if you were walking the street with your dog, that Hitler would be one of those people that you meet on the street that's like, oh my God, look, I love your dog. What a nice dog. What's his name? Is it a man? Is it a boy or a girl? How long have you had him? How old? I always bring treats in my pocket. He takes a treat out and gives it to your dog, and you think, man, what a nice man. Except you fast forward 80 years, looking back at history going, man, that guy was terrible. Even people in the time, Churchill and the Brits and the Americans, like, this is an evil human being. But not to Hitler, he wasn't. And not to the other Nazis, and not to the people that voted for him and kept him in power. And so, how do we know? Like, how do we really know? Because if the argument here is it's difficult, if not impossible, for you to know if you're actually an evil person, how do you really know? And I'm not sure we really can. I do know that there's some things that you can do. I do know that, unlike Hitler, you should keep people around you that tell you harsh truths about yourself. You should not get rid of other people with different opinions than you. That's what he tried to do. That's a fatal flaw in his morality, is as opposed to listening and talking, he chose violence. He chose genocide. He chose, you don't belong to live, therefore go away. And we can do that ourselves as individuals, but really, we're not going to, you and I are probably not going to start a genocide, but we can find ourselves in situations where we hear an uncomfortable truth and we don't want to see that person anymore. Or we can hear an uncomfortable truth at work from our team and we choose not to listen to it. We choose to ignore it. We choose to let our ego get in the way. And so a willingness to confront truth and ensuring that you have people there and not getting rid of them, not running away from that, that's a key point. But it points to one of the most fundamental pieces of this, which is challenging. And I'm going to ask you, dear listener, to just take a deep breath, because this is a hard truth. But if you want to be like a good person, if you want to be someone who's improving, who's not vile, who's not evil, who's not one of these people we're talking about, you're going to be bothered by moral qualms all the time. You're going to be bothered by moral conundrums all the time. You're going to be in that constant state of, is this right or is it not? You're going to be that person that hears a very difficult truth from someone on your team or someone at work or your family and doesn't just go home, eat their meal, go to bed with a big smile on their face. You might be the person that has to stay up for an hour, 2 hours, thinking about that, digesting that truth. And this is why every man has his excuses, because it's so much easier to just have excuses. This is why the more vile you become, the more touching your story has to be. Because it's so difficult. The more vile you are, the more evil you are, the more your ego and your consciousness has to shut out so much truth to accommodate for that. And so how do we try? How do we do our best to be good? Well, I think you just have to accept that you're going to be challenged by some things and you're going to struggle with some of these questions. And that's not a feature. That's not a bug. It's a feature. It's a feature of that development, of that growth. So I would challenge you, I would encourage you that the next time you are bothered by something, I'm not talking about something stupid. I'm not talking about something silly, like your child left a mug on the floor or something. Like, I'm talking about a moral conundrum, something that's like, this is uncomfortable. This is an uncomfortable truth. Maybe see that as a good thing as opposed to a bad thing. Maybe don't label that as this is uncomfortable, therefore it's bad. Label it as, this is growth. This is what growth feels like. These are growing pains. And so as opposed to shutting it away, appreciate it for what it is. And no, before you get ahead of yourself, that doesn't mean that you never have to sleep at night. That doesn't mean that you always have to be in this state of constant tension and thinking and conundruming and, what am I going to do here? What's the right move? No, you don't have to always be in that situation. But you certainly have to be in that situation some of the time. Otherwise, how do you grow? How do you learn? How do you face uncomfortable truths? Uncomfortable truths, by definition, are uncomfortable. And so you have to deal with that discomfort. So do your best. Do your best as an aspiring Stoic to not make excuses, to face things head on. Try and sleep at night. Try and process it. Try and manage those emotions. Try and manage those moral failures and conundrums so that they don't take over your life. But ultimately, don't see them as a bug. I think that's a feature of someone who's striving to be good.